Hey, hello, and welcome to today's webinar, our Hot Topics training on configuration tips for admin users. We'll also review the R1 2022 new release of Sage Intacct. I'm Sarah Novak, Marketing Manager at LBMC Technology Solutions, and I'll just be covering some housekeeping items before we get started here. All phone lines have been muted to eliminate any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know using the chat panel. We will be taking questions throughout today's webinar, and we'll be answering them towards the end. But please feel free to submit questions at any time, and we will either answer your question during the webinar, and if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you afterwards. This webinar is eligible for CPE. In order to qualify for CPE credits, you must stay on the entire session and answer any polling questions when prompted. We will be recording this session and sending that out in a few days' time. So today we have Angela Payne, who will be presenting, and Angela serves as our Sage Intacct Services Manager. And she has been with us for over 7 years and has been in the accounting world for over 16 years. So thank you again for joining us. And Angela, I will turn it over to you.
So hopefully you guys can hear me. If you can't, please make a comment in the chat so that way we make sure that everything is working smoothly for you guys. I'm glad that you've joined us today to be able to learn more about the hot topics. Today we're going to be talking about the admin configuration tips for users within Intacct. Because I know many times you guys have just been working in the system for quite some time and may not have revisited a lot of those initial configuration settings that were set up. So we would just kind of want to revisit that. So therefore you can maybe make some adjustment to those as needed as you kind of grown through your implementation. All right, so today, like I said, we're going to talk about some of those admin configuration changes. We're also going to take a look at some things that maybe will increase your efficiencies for month end. Look at some security settings that may need to be updated and changed. We're going to take a look at those checklists, other permissions and preferences as well in the environment. So one of the first questions is, how long have you been using Intacct? I always like to get an idea of how long people have been using Intacct. If it's been less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6 years, or 7 or more years. So if you can just take a moment and respond to that polling question, then that would be great.
And that polling question should be open. If anyone has any issues seeing it or responding, please just send us a chat. All right, Angela, it looks like we've got everybody's response.
Okay. Great. Great. Keep moving forward. Thank you for participating in that poll. All right, so first of all, we're going to take a look at some of the global settings that are available within Intacct. Like I said before, some of these settings were initially configured for you during your initial implementation, but you may not have taken a chance to look back at those going forward to make some changes. That you're a little more familiar with how the processes are in your system, in your environment, and in your company and everything. So I want to take a look at that. And then I also wanted to show you some just kind of quick tips of how to make some changes, some configuration changes in your system to make things a little bit easier to use. So one of the first things I want to take a look at is, let me bring this over. And just let me know if you can see the Intacct environment now.
Yes, we can see it, Angela.
Okay, great. All right, so in this environment, I'm going to take a look at, this is a demo environment, I'm going to take a look at the company settings. So in the company settings, the got all kinds of difficulties with computer today. I just switched to a different one, I apologize. Give me just a second. In the company settings, we're going to take a look at the configuration. All right, so when you take a look at this configuration, you'll notice that you can sorry, my mouse was disappearing on me. You can make some changes in here. One of the first things I like to make a change to is that in the global settings, you may have a need in your environment if you have multiple, maybe your companies are in different countries, where you can change the language that you can actually view on the in the screen in the UI. You can actually change the language of how it's viewed. So it's currently set at English United States, but you can make a change here to where it's English Australian, or UK, or South Africa. So if you have companies that maybe have some people that are working in the UK, they can actually change these global settings. So in their UI environment, for an example, like Civet saying check, CHECK, as we know it in the US. Then for the UK locale, it would have it actually spelled as CHEQUE. So therefore, it makes it a little more user-friendly in their environment as they're kind of navigating throughout the system. Okay, so you can have that global setting. Now, you cannot have different settings for each individual entity. That's not currently supported right now, but it is on the roadmap for them to be able to change that. But if you do have, a company that needs to have that different setting, you can actually make that setting, make that change. Another thing that you can also do is you can change the order of the applications. You can do that in a couple of different ways. You can change the order of the applications in this display option here. Okay, so by setting this globally, then it will apply to all of your users. And to change the order of application listing here, is you can just kind of drag and drop. You just want to click on that, drag and drop it. And then therefore, it allows you to put your most commonly used applications at the top, and then those that are less used down towards the bottom. Okay, so you can change the order of your applications here. Or you can also, if you are in your drop-down list here at the top of all of your different applications, you can also do a drag and drop there. So you can drag and drop to rearrange the order of those applications there. Now this is global settings, so this would apply to all of your users. In just a little bit, we'll talk about some actual user permissions. So at a user level, then they can also make further adjustments to that and make those changes as well to rearrange the order of their applications. Okay. So another thing I like to point out as well, if you'll notice that this little icon where it's identifying your top level, you'll notice that if I click on that and I click into a different entity, you'll notice that the new entity has a different colored icon. This kind of helps if you're working in different entities at different times. You can have different colors available here. So these are all can be changed as well. You notice to the left of the name of that level, you have a drop down arrow, and you can choose one of the standard colors, or you can also choose a custom color. Okay, choose a custom color, then you can make this be kind of whatever you want it to be. This kind of identifies easily kind of what level you're working at. So that's really important that that you can do that. If you obviously if you're working at multiple different levels, so that way you can kind of easily identify that. Once again, you can set these colors at the global settings. And then also when we talk about user permissions, and they can also change those colors at that point. It just makes it kind of easy. It's good visual to be able to know which level that you're actually working at in the system. All right. So some other things that I'd like to take a look at are co-branding. Obviously here you'll see that this one says Skyline Software PST. So you can update this as well by adding a co-branding logo here, okay? You can only have one co-branding logo in your environment at a time, but if you had multiple different logos, then you could definitely upload a JPEG file here that had both logos in that. So your system may currently have, you're saying Sage Intacct here, but if you actually upload a co-branding logo here, then it will replace that into this area of your UI. So therefore you have that company information there as well. Another area that I like to take a look at is just document sequencing. A lot of people don't realize, kind of where those where the auto numbering is coming from, like for your attachments or from your for your invoicing, things like that. Those were initially configured and set up during your original implementation. So this is a list of all of the different document numbering sequences that are in your environment. So at any time, if you decide that you want to change the numbering, right, then you can also do that yourself. As long as you have admin privileges and permissions, you can actually come in here and change this. So if I wanted to change how my employee were being numbered currently in this system here, the auto numbering for the employees is just a four character number. The next number is going to be 1100. I can come into the sequencing, go to advanced settings, and then I can put in here what I want it to be. So if I wanted to say, okay, I want this to actually be 6 characters, I want it to be prefixed with an E for employee, and then I want to have a dash in there as a separator, then you'll see here what the next number would actually look like in your system. So you can make those changes yourself as an administrator of your company to be able to update those. You'll notice that this applies to your AP adjustments, your AR adjustments. It'll apply to invoicing, credit memos, customer IDs. It also applies to employee IDs. So anything that you have that's being auto-numbered in the system, this is where you would locate those document numbering sequences to be able to make any changes or updates to those. Okay. So next, all right, so now we're going to look at some security settings as well that's in Intacct. So there's some different security settings that as an administrator you may want to take a look at and adjust as needed. So we'll take a look at the timeouts and the password settings for your security. We'll also look at setting up sender domain settings and then single sign-on as well, because a lot of companies like using the single sign-on. So in the company configuration, once again, we go back to company, and then you'll click edit. Then under the security, once again, these are all global settings. You'll notice that you have all of these sign-in settings. Okay, so during your initial implementation, these were set to be kind of what best practices were based on our experience of doing other implementations, but these can also be changed by the administrator of your company. So the timeout default inactivity. So basically, this time frame here is saying that if you're inactive in the system for 6 hours, then Intacct will automatically log you out of the system. Okay. Some people like to decrease this, make it a lower number of hours that if you're inactive in the environment, that it will log you out. Currently, this one is set at 6 hours, so that may be something that you might want to check in your environment, see if you wanted to decrease that. There's also a default session duration. So this identifies how many hours a user can actually be logged into the system without being logged out. Okay, 12 hours is usually a good number of hours to allow them to be in there, when a lot of people typically work a little bit longer than 8 hours in a day. So 12 hours is usually a good point. You may want to make that lower or higher, depending on how your users are actually accessing the system and what their typical workday looks like. Once again, like I said, these are default settings. When we look at the user permissions in just a little bit, or preferences, you'll be able to see how they can actually make their maximum hours less than these hours. So therefore, they can put even more restrictions on themselves. You also have an option here for the passwords. So you have a change duration. It's set to yearly on this particular example. You can change that internally to be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, or 6-monthly. Okay. So, typically we may see this set up as quarterly, maybe 6-monthly. Since it's a demo environment, it's set to be yearly in it. But typically the most commonly used ones are going to be quarterly or 6-monthly. So as an administrator, you can make those changes. So therefore, you're controlling how often people have to change their passwords to access their Intacct environment. You can also identify the maximum length of the characters, right? So this one has 8 characters in the length of their password. And then we're also saying that we cannot use any of the 3 previously used passwords, okay? So you can make those adjustments, determine what your internal policies are within your company. And a lot of times, sometimes the length may be a little bit longer because I think it's becoming more common practice for people to use an actual phrase or a sentence as their security, as their passwords to be able to access different environments. So you may have to extend the length of that out to be able to, allow that type of security. You also have maximum sign-in attempts that you can identify here. So in this example here, it's set to be 10 maximum sign-in attempts, okay? That would mean that the person could only attempt to sign into the environment 10 times per day, and then they have to wait until the next calendar day before they can attempt to sign in any longer. You can also reset a user's password up to 5 times per day. Okay, so hopefully after you've reset their password 5 times, they will not need to have it reset anymore after that. So hopefully 5 times will allow them to get access to the environment. All right. This is an area here that a lot of companies may not be aware of. If you're sending out emails from Intacct and like customer invoices or purchase orders from Intacct, things like that, then that email actually has the Intacct domain name, okay, that's associated with it. A lot of times that will be blocked by the end recipient of the different firewalls they may have on their side. So Intacct has in place to where you can actually put your domain name in here. The emails then that go out of Intacct, like sending invoices to your customers, would actually have the domain name of your company attached to that. So it kind of prevents some of those things from being blocked at the end recipient. So in this example, if LBMC was using this environment, then the center domain name here would be lbmc.com. Okay, because that's our domain name. So then anything that was emailed out of this environment would have that domain name attached to it and typically prevents any kind of blocks from the end recipient. Okay. So if you don't currently have your domain name in that field, I would recommend adding it there. And if you need any help with doing that, then just let us know. Okay. Now, if you're using order entry, the order entry email templates that you set up will override this domain name here. Okay, so you may have some order entry email templates that have different emails in it, so it will override this domain name here. Okay. There's some other things that are available within Intacct as well, that now that you've been using Intacct for a while, you can enable this single sign-on. A lot of our clients like to enable that internally. We use this as well. So therefore, people don't have to keep up with as many passwords, right? So they can just use one password to actually access the different applications on their internal network. So you can enable the single sign-on here. And then your internal IT department would have to complete this information here. And then on the actual users, you would update what the single sign-on is. So if this was enabled here with the correct information from your IT department, then when you go look at your user listing, you will see that there is a tab. There'll be a tab over here that says SSO. And on that tab, then is where you'll add in the actual information that they need to use as the login for the SSO. There'll be a tab on the user, so you would edit the user, and then you would have a tab here that says SSO, and you would actually add that information there. Okay. So that would allow them to actually access multiple apps then within your internal network using one password. Okay. All right. So also with the single sign-on, as you're talking with your internal IT team, then you'll also want to make sure that they can use these are the kind of suggested providers, I guess, that are verified to work with Sage Intacct is the SureBridge, the One Login, Centrify, and then the Active Directory Federated Services. So just make sure that you're touching base with your IT department and making sure that those are the verified providers that will work with Intacct. If you have any questions about setting up your single sign-on, you'll definitely reach out to us and we'll be able to provide assistance to you. All right, so the next thing I want to take a look at is kind of talking about accounting periods, the reporting method, and primary account number length. We get a lot of questions about people wanting to change their primary account number length, right? Intacct does not allow you to do that once you have general ledger activity attached to the GL accounts. So if you initially began with a 4-digit primary account number for your GL accounts, you cannot make that a 5-digit GL account number once you have activity associated with that. I want to also, kind of show you as well with reporting periods and accounting period, kind of where you can see that information within Intacct. So in Intacct, whenever you look at the company settings, okay, so let's go back to the company settings again. On the accounting tab, you'll see that this particular environment is set up with standard accounting periods with an accrual reporting method. Okay, so you have standard accounting periods and you have custom accounting periods. So some people may have some custom accounting periods set up, or maybe they have like a 445 type of accounting period. Sometimes it's 554, sometimes it's 454. So those are custom accounting periods that are defined in the system. And then the standard accounting periods are just your regular current month end, calendar month ends. Okay. Reporting methods, you can have accrual basis, you can have cash basis, you can have accrual and cash basis. So at any point in time, you can make a change to what your reporting method is. You can change from accrual to accrual and cash, or from cash to accrual. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is if you have any future dated transactions in your system, then you'll have to delete those out in order to make that change of your reporting method. Okay. Some areas that you may not be familiar with is whenever you are looking at your reporting periods, okay, in the general ledger setup, you'll have a list of current reporting periods that are in the environments, okay? So you see in this environment here, these reporting periods are extended out through 2025. If for some reason you get ready to close your books at month end and you do not see that reporting period available in the close of your books because they don't exist in the environment yet, okay? So these can easily be imported into your system, or you can add them manually as well. By just clicking this button here, you can click add and you can manually add in here what your reporting periods are. But there's also an import template that you can use to add additional reporting periods, okay? The import template can also be used, I've seen it used several times, if someone has kind of the custom accounting periods and they have reporting periods that align with those custom accounting period end dates. They may also want to add in some additional reporting periods that are the actual true calendar end dates. So to be able to import additional reporting periods as an administrator, you can go to company, go to import data. And this is where you would actually get access to all of the different templates that were originally used during your implementation process. And you'll see here that they have reporting periods. And this is a template that you can use to be able to add additional reporting periods. You can actually add multiple years in if you want, or you can just decide that you may want to manually add in. You put your name, your header, information, start, end dates, and whether it's available for budgeting or not. And then you would save that as a CSV file and then come to the same place here to be able to import this back in. And then it will update your list of your reporting periods. So therefore, they're available for closing books. Even if the reporting periods do not exist in the environment, it will still allow you to post transactions in those periods. Okay. It's just when you get reclose your books, you will not see those reporting periods available. If you have any questions on any of that, then just definitely let us know, and we can assist you with getting more reporting periods added into the system, or troubleshooting anything else that may come up. All right. So we talked about the global settings just a few moments ago. Now we're going to take a look at the user preferences. Like I said, the global settings are kind of the highest point that controls everything. But on the user, some of these settings can be changed to have more restriction on that specific user. Okay. So with that, we'll take a look and kind of access the user preferences in a couple of different places. As the user yourself, if you're going to update your specific preferences, then you would hover over your name here to the right and you would click My Preferences. As an administrator, you can also manage individual user settings as well, preferences. If you go to Company and you go to your list of users, then in your list of users, you also have access to all of their preferences over here to the right. Okay. So this takes you to the same screen as if the individual user was also making some changes. A lot of times this is beneficial if you have some users that are set up as approvers in different workflows. You may need to come in here and actually take a look at some of the approval options that are available on the user preferences as far as for notifications for approvals. Okay. So in this, you'll see here we have security preferences. So there's not as many options here as we had at the global settings for the company. But once again, you'll see on my global settings, I had the inactivity duration set at 6 hours and the session duration sign out set at 12. So therefore, the user cannot go past that. They can make it more restrictive and make that a lower number. And same thing with the duration. They can do the same thing. They just can't go above and beyond what was set on the global settings. Okay. This is also where you can connect to the Learning Center here. Okay, we'll talk about later on in some of the release updates that permissions for Learning Center are no longer required on the user, but you can actually access the Learning Center here. You can access the Learning Center from the Help and Support option here at the top right as well. The Learning Center is a great place for you and your users to be able to go, to be able to take some on-demand classes that are available for Intacct. And there's some other than available virtual classes that have a slight, there's a small cost to those, but there are a lot of on-demand classes that are available as well, just to continue to increase your knowledge about Intacct through the Learning Center. All right, so in this next section now, this is the email notification. So this is where I was talking about earlier about if people are set up as approvers in the environment, then you may need to mark some of these boxes here so that they'll receive an email notification whenever something is ready for them to approve. Okay, so that applies to purchasing approvals, that applies to the AP bill entry approvals, journal entry approvals, and also payment requests. The payment request could be from AP or from your employee expense report payments. Okay, so if you want your user to be able to receive email notifications if there's something awaiting their approval, then you can check these boxes here. They'll receive the email notification. Okay, the approval confirmations down here at the bottom says approved payment. This is notifications that go to if you have someone that's set up to select AP bills for payment, and then someone else actually approves those. Then once those are approved, then that person who had selected them originally would receive an email notification to let them know that those have been approved. Okay, same thing like the employee expense reports. If someone selected those for payment and then someone else approved them, that original person who selected them for payment would get an email notification to let them know that they have been approved. So therefore they can process the payment. It can be via check, via ACH, whichever method is appropriate for that payment type. You can assign those to be individual or consolidated. So they could get an individual email for each approval, or they could get a consolidated one that basically would send them one email that showed everything that was approved on that day. Right. Another area that's very important for email notifications, if you guys are not using the process and store option that's available in some of these reportings, it's a little button at the top of some reports. I would recommend that you do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very large or complicated report that you're using to process and store, but it does allow you to kind of generate the report behind the scenes, and then you'll get an email notification to let you know that it's available for you to view. So I'm going to take a look here so you can kind of see what that button looks like. And this is available on most of the reports in the screen in the system. So I'll go to General Ledger and I'll go to Trial Balance. You see this process and store option here. So I would make my selections here of what I was wanting to look at. I can click view, right? The process and store button still remains. So I can actually view the information if I wanted to do so. Or I can do process and store from that original screen where I was making my filter selections. When you click process and store, then you'll identify store in Intacct, or you can store in cloud. So you can actually have this stored like in Dropbox or some type of cloud service provider, right? You'll identify the report name and what format that you want this sent in. So you can have HTML, you can have it in printable. So printable is going to be a PDF. You have CSV, Excel, or text format. Okay, so those are different formats of how you can receive this report. If you have it sent to you or someone else, right, in HTML, then you have to make sure that they can access the Intacct environment to be able to view it in HTML. Okay, if it's in Excel or CSV or PDF, they do not have to be a user in the environment to be able to view the report. So once you identify that and put your report name, then you click OK. That report then runs behind the scenes. Okay, and then you get an email notification that it's available for you to view. When you get that email notification, you would come back to that module and go to My Stored Reports, and it also states this in the email, My Stored Reports, and then you'll see a list of reports here. Depending on which format presentations you've chosen, you'll have that hyperlink then under the specific column. Click on that hyperlink, and it'll take you and let you view that report. These stored reports do stay in the system for an extended period of time. So it's just kind of a good way if you wanted to run a report and you actually wanted to see that, then you can actually keep that in the system, stored in the system. Okay. So that's My Stored Reports. So to get the email notifications that those are available and ready for you to view, you would have this box checked here. Okay. We'll also talk about this recurring transactions spell. So the recurring transactions spell, a lot of times people have set up recurring journal entries, and they'll have it set up to where they'll get an email notification. So if you want to know if for some reason that failed to post, maybe recurring journal entries could be recurring invoices, right? And kind of recurring transaction that you have set to post. It could be a statistical entry that you're having set up as a recurring entry. If you check this box here that says recurring transactions fail, if for some reason that failed to post during the month, and that could be because maybe you made a dimensional field inactive, not realizing that it was used in one of these recurring transactions, then this will send you an email to let you know that that transaction had failed to post. So therefore, as you're doing your month end, you'll be able to kind of go in and get that correction made. All right. Then the other area here is this receive checklist notifications. So this is some functionality that was actually released by Intacct a couple of releases ago, to where you can now set up different checklists within the Intacct environment. Okay. We'll talk about some checklists here in just a little bit. But if you check this box here to receive checklist notifications, if you are assigned a task on a checklist, then you'll receive an email notification to let you know that you've been assigned that task, what the expected due date is for that task as well. So that way you'll have that identified in your emails. Right. So I mentioned earlier about how you can change the appearance of the order of your applications, right? So we did the global settings of those applications. So within the user preferences, you can also change the order. Okay. So as a user, you can say use my own order, and then you can rearrange the order of those applications as well. So therefore you can maybe at the global setting, you may have the applications listed in alphabetical order, but then that specific user may want to rearrange those and actually put them in the order with the most commonly or more frequently used applications at the top of the list that they're using, and then the less frequently used ones at the bottom of the list. Okay. You can also change, you see here, so we're talking about colors. You can actually change the top level color to be a different color. You can also have your default here to be something other than the home page for Intacct. And this is on the specific user preferences. So if, as an executive, you may have a dashboard that you would rather, whenever you log into Intacct, you want to go directly to that dashboard to be able to see some financial reports or specific KPIs before you actually start looking at anything else in the system. And you can actually change this to say dashboard and then choose that specific dashboard. So when you log into Intacct, then it will open up with that dashboard being the main screen instead of the home screen. Okay. If you have someone who is always working in AP, they may want to change this to be the accounts payable module. So therefore, whenever they log into the system, it takes them directly to the accounts payable module, right? You can make those customizations as well. Personalizations of the pages. I recommend that the list screens for these records per page, that you change this to be the maximum number of 999. Okay. The reason I recommend that is if you're looking at a fairly long journal entry, this will allow you to see up to 999 rows on one page before you have to scroll to the next page. If you're looking at a list of your AP bills, it'll allow you to see 999 of them before you have to go to the next page. So I think that's, changing that default is going to be very beneficial to everyone. Right. Check preferences. So in the check preferences, most people put signatures on the actual checking accounts themselves. That allows a little bit more flexibility of who can actually print checks with those signatures on there. So if the check signature is on the checking account itself, then you could have multiple different people that could actually print checks with those checks on it. If you had an approval process set up, you still have to go through that approval process first, but you could have different people who could actually print checks on the checks, print the signatures on the checks. There are some times that you may need to have a second signature printed on a check. Okay, if it's over a certain amount, dollars or something like that. So you could have an actual signature then on a specific user's preferences. Therefore, that user would be the only one that could print that signature on a check. Okay, no other users could do that because it's actually assigned to that user as that they could be the one that could print that actual signature. If it's on the checking account itself, then multiple users could print checks with those signatures. If it's on the actual user preferences, then only that user can print that signature on a check. Okay. The offsets, the printing offsets are also on the user preferences. The reason being is that different users may be printing to different printers, and different printers may require different alignment settings. So those would be on each individual user to be able to make those changes on the user preferences. And we also have here, once again, like we saw at the global setting, you also have at the user preferences setting, you have these options here. Okay, so even though I said earlier you cannot change the language per entity, each user can change the language they see on the screen within their user preferences. Okay, so if you have someone who is more accustomed to seeing the verbiage in the UK format, then they can change it on their user preferences. They can change it to be the English UK. Therefore, they will see that verbiage in that that would be more similar to what you'd see in the UK than the US. So it's not entity specific. It's you have a global setting and there are company settings, and then each user can go in and make changes themselves as well. That would just apply to just their user when they're logged in. Some other things I'd like to take a look at is in Intacct, we talk about when you look at these different modules, how when you hover over these different tasks, you'll notice there's a star that appears here on the right-hand side. So whenever you star something, that actually puts it into your favorites over here. So if there's some tasks that you use more frequently, you can actually star those tasks so you don't have to go to the full list of activities to find what you're doing. You could actually click on your favorites here and it would have a list of what those favorites are. If you had favorites in different modules, then you can select all and you would be able to see all of the favorites, or you can easily filter here then for specific modules to be able to see what you've starred as your favorites. But there's also available, there's bookmarks. So you can also bookmark, if you're on your accounts payable, with the accounts payable bill listing. On the accounts payable bill listing, you can also create a bookmark. So this is like making a bookmark for your browsers, right? You click the bookmark here, say bookmark this page, okay? When you do bookmark this page, it will allow you then to create a name for that that's maybe more user friendly as to what that bookmark is for, and you click save. So then whenever you want to go back to that page, instead of going to your favorites, or going to the drop-down list here and going to the list of tasks, you can actually go to the bookmark listing and get to that area from the bookmark listing. Okay, so that's just another area that I don't think is used very often, but it is available to be able to bookmark things. Okay. All right. All right, so we have another polling question. It says, would you like to be able to track your month-end closing task in Intacct? So we'll have that up on the screen so that way you can respond. We'll give you a couple of minutes to be able to respond to that.
Angela, it looks like of those that have answered, everyone has said yes so far.
Great. It's great news. Looks like we got maybe about 20 more seconds to respond. Right. Hopefully everyone was able to respond. So with that being said, month-end closing task and Intacct, you're in luck. So now Intacct offers a process to be able to track your month-end close without having to use email correspondence, kind of be able to track, make sure things are completed across your team at month end. We're going to take a look at that. So it's called checklists. Okay, it's under the company settings. There are permissions under the user permissions that you'll have to add access to be able to have your users to be able to see this, to be able to make changes to these. So we'll take a look at those permissions here in just a few moments as well. But also on the checklist options, you have some user restrictions. Okay, so it kind of gives you some additional controls over the checklist options outside of the actual permissions themselves. Okay, so you see here we have default for who can update checklists. If any user with permission can update the checklist, or you can restrict that to only the checklist owners or creators, or just the checklist owners. So you may want to modify those to be work best with whatever your company is needing. Then you can also update assignments. So within these checklists, you'll have assignments, and then you can default who can actually make those changes to those assignments as well. So that's outside of the actual user permissions that where you can kind of manage that. So creating a checklist in Intacct, we're going to create a checklist category, add checklist name, select a status, enter assignments, and then add constraints. Okay. This is an example of what one will look like once you get it set up, and we'll look in this demo environment as well. But on these checklists, you'll see that we got a checklist category. So these checklists can actually be duplicated and reused each month. So this may be, kind of the template that you're going to initially start with. You could call it checklist name, month-end close checklist, and you could even say, template. And then you would duplicate this one and actually reuse it and change the checklist name to be, checklist for May or checklist for June, right? So you can just reuse the same template, but still keep track of everything as each month goes along. So you'll notice in here, we've got a status of this checklist. We have the assignment name, start dates and due dates, and who it's assigned to. The assignee list is pulling from your employee list. Okay. The assignment status, and then they can go in and put in whatever the percent complete is. We'll talk about constraints in just a little bit as well, because we can also put some constraints in that will disallow a completion of a task or an assignment prior to having another one completed first. Okay. All right. We're going to take a look at this in Intacct. So that way you can see where this is set up. Like I said, this is added and controlled by additional permissions. So if you look at your user permissions, take a look at this user here. So in your subscriptions, when you look at the company permissions, you'll see that down here at the bottom, you've got checklist, assignments, checklist categories, status, and assignment categories, checklist all. You have several different tasks that are assigned just to checklists specifically. Okay, as most of you are probably familiar, that whenever a new functionality is added to Intacct, it does not automatically grant permissions to that functionality to all of your users. Okay, so you need to make sure that you go in and update those. So if you want people to be able to see and use your checklist, you'll have to come in and update these. That may be on individual user permissions if you're using user-based permissions, or it could just be creating another role to add that role to specific users. So you can control this here. Once you get those updated, then in the company module itself, you'll have an all tab, and then this is where you'll see your checklists. Okay, so you can click on the checklist. It's going to give you a listing of those checklists. You have an add option here. Okay, you also have assignments. On the assignments tab, this is where you would be able to assign specific tasks to individual people with start dates and due dates, things like that. Now, if I go back to my checklist, in my checklist, you'll see I have several different ones here. So we're going to take a look at each of these so we can kind of see an idea. Now, most of these are addressing month-end close, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only purpose of a checklist. You may have checklists in here for, say, you may create, if people are using the contracts module, you may have a checklist in here for just a contract, right? Where you can have that they reviewed the actual executed contract from the customer with what the actual contract header and contract lines identified in Intacct, and make sure all of that was in alignment. You may have on there maybe review the billing schedules, review the revenue expense schedules. You can have different checklists for different things. We just try to keep it simple by using just a month-end checklist, but you can have a variety of different workflows that you may want to create checklists for. So I'll take a look at this first checklist here. You'll notice, like I said, we have different categories, and you can create different categories. Okay, so you may have maybe it's just a contract process review checklist, right? You have different categories. You have different statuses that you can add. Okay, these are just some that were that we added into this demo environment. You can also name it, right? Make it user friendly. An additional description field if you need more characters than what you can put in the name. You have the owner. So if you remember when I showed you that one slide about having additional restrictions placed on this, that only the owner could make changes to it, right? Then this is kind of where you identify who that owner is. The assignment names are all text fields, okay? So that way you can put whatever the assignment name needs to be. Additional description here if you need to do that. Start dates, due dates, who you're assigning it to. So like I said, this is pulling from the employee list. Okay, so you can assign that to whomever. Assignment status, you can update these statuses as well, so you can create additional ones if you need to have more than just like complete, in progress, not started. You can have those. The percent complete, the actual end date, and then attachments. So as people are doing these things, the reconciled bank accounts, you guys are probably aware that on a reconciliation, you can actually attach a copy of your bank statement to the reconciliation. But you may also want whomever completed that reconciliation to, create a PDF or Excel version of that reconciliation report and then attach that here as well. So therefore, it's just easily accessible for the person who's reviewing this checklist to make sure that everything was completed for month end. Okay. That may be an option of what they want to put there. So it wouldn't necessarily be the bank statement. It could be a copy of the reconciliation report, okay, that they've attached there, or multiple ones, right? So that's one example. As I mentioned, you have a duplicate option here. So you can easily come in here and click duplicate, update the statuses for a new month, and therefore you can you don't have to add to it or recreate everything from beginning. Another example here is this one has a few more task assignments here. Okay, you'll notice this one also in the view mode, you can see if there are any constraints. This one does not have any specific constraints listed on it. So therefore they can complete these tasks in whatever order is makes sense to them. Okay, the next example I'll show you will actually have some constraints on it, but this one does not have any constraints. So they don't have to, it's not dependent on a predecessor task being completed before they can complete their task. Okay. All right. The last example here is actually showing those with constraints. Okay. So the constraints that I placed on this one is that they cannot complete the bank reconciliation or the accounts receivable reconciliation before completing the accounts receivable close process. Okay. You notice that's identified over here. So if a user tried to go in here and actually complete this process before this first assignment was completed, they'll get an error message saying that they cannot complete it. Okay, so that's kind of help make sure that everything is working in a specific order, right? Because when you're doing your month-end close, you want to make sure that things are kind of done in an orderly fashion so that something's not overlooked. So you can easily put those constraints on there. You can have multiple constraints as well. So you may have something that's more dependent on, AR recon may be dependent on both of these predecessors of being completed before you can actually do this one. You can have multiple constraints on the same assignment. Like I said, these checklists don't necessarily have to be for just month-end close. They could be for a variety of different workflows that you may be managing, maybe just through email or maybe in Excel or Smartsheet or something like that. Externally, you can actually create these checklists. Checklists can be created at the top level and therefore would be shared among all, across all of your entities. Or you can also create checklists at entities and be entity specific. You'll notice there's an include private here. This particular environment does not have any checklist at the entity levels, but if it did, it would be entity specific. So if you have multiple entities, there may be a different workflow that entity needs to follow before they can complete their month-end close. So you may want to create that checklist at that entity and make it entity specific. You can still view it from the top, but it's just not going to be applicable to all of their entities. So next question is, how many users do you manage your environment? This is another polling question. If you manage 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and this is including your employee users as well as business users. You guys can just take a couple of minutes and respond to that question. So hopefully everyone's had enough time to respond to that polling question. We'll keep moving right along. Right, so within the Intacct environment, most environments are initially configured as user-based permissions. I'm going to show you today how you can make that change to be role-based permissions. A lot of times role-based permissions are more easily managed as you scale and grow and add additional users to your company. To be able to kind of add, like where I was talking earlier about adding those permissions for the checklist, right? Instead of having to go into each individual user and update permissions to grant them access to see the checklist. If you're using a role-based permission, then you could just create a role that was just for checklist and assign that role to specific users. Much easier, much faster way to update permissions. Like I said, most environments are configured initially as user-based permissions. And then at any point in time, you can actually change to be a role-based permission. And as an admin, you also have an option to be able to try a role as you're creating those before you actually assign them to users. So you can actually see kind of what that user would actually have access to and be able to see. So some of the pros and cons, versus role-based versus user-based. As I mentioned, you're assigning permissions to roles, and then those roles are being assigned to users. So you can stack roles onto a user to grant them more access, okay, or have more restrictive access to areas by not having as many roles on there. You can reuse the roles across multiple different users. Okay. As I mentioned, like with the checklist, you can adjust the permissions on that role to be able to kind of grant permissions to a large number of users at one time, instead of having to go into each individual user and update those permissions. Whenever you are setting up new users, it also is a little bit easier when you have role-based permissions, that if you copy an existing user, you duplicate an existing user, then the role assignment for that user will carry over. You don't have to add the roles to that person. If you are duplicating a user who is user-based permissions, then you'll have to assign all of those new permissions to that new user. Okay. So let's take a look at this in Intacct. On Intacct, like I said, you can change whether you're using role-based or user-based permissions at any point in time. That's under the company settings. So under the company settings, if you scroll down, I said this, the default is to be user-based permissions. But if you toggle this to be role-based permissions, your existing users will not lose access to the environment for the permissions they have or anything like that. They will not lose that access. Intacct will create what's called a system-generated role that retains all of those permissions that were currently assigned to that user, so they can continue to work while you continue to create new roles. So once you make that, once you toggle that to be role-based, then under the company settings, once again, under admin, then you'll see a listing of your roles. Okay, you'll see here that these were system-generated roles that were then assigned to specific users. In this listing here, you can also look and see who actually has these assigned to them. So if I wanted to see which users had the admin role assigned to them, I can click on role assignment. It's going to give me a list of all the users who actually have that role assigned to them. Okay. I can also see here, if I click on subscriptions, I can see exactly which permissions that role has assigned to it. Okay. So kind of quick and easy way to kind of modify that. So if I had this admin role, I've got role assignment, I can see, okay, this is who it's going to affect. If I make any changes to that role, it's going to affect these specific users. Okay. In the actual role, if you want to add or take away any subscriptions, and you click on subscriptions here, and this is going to be where you would modify and make any changes to the actual permissions to that role. Okay. All right. Once you have your roles set up, then as I said, as an admin, you'll see a link here that says try this role as an admin user. So try this role. You can click that, it'll open up in another tab. So therefore you can kind of test out that role to make sure that you're not granting that user more permissions than what they really need to have at that moment in time. You can try it out before you actually assign it to anyone. Once you create the roles, then you'll go back to your users and you'll edit the user. You'll see a tab then that says roles information. This is where you'll assign the roles. So you can add multiple roles here, list multiple roles here. There are some tasks like managing like other payments. So like additional payments, you can add in like other receipts in AR, but you can also do that in cash management. So if you grant permissions to that in AR, but you don't grant permissions to that in cash management, the AR permissions will override and will allow that person to be able to do that task. Just kind of keep that in mind as well. When you're creating these roles, that's why as an admin, it's always a good thing to use that try this role to actually see, what they can actually access and what they can't access. Like I said, the standard default is user-based permissions, but at any point in time, you can change that to be role-based. As you continue to add more users to the system, assigning roles just makes it a little bit more efficient, a little bit easier to manage. All right. The next thing I want to take a look at is the GL outlier detection video. Okay, so the GL outlier detection. This was a service that uses machine learning, artificial intelligence learning, and was available in R3 or R4 of last year, to where it can be enabled in your general ledger. If you are currently using journal entry approvals, or if you're not using them and you want to start using your entry approvals, then I would recommend enabling this outlier detection functionality. There's no subscription cost associated with this. Okay. What it will do is it will actually look and monitor your journal entries that you're posting or that you're approving, going through the approval process that you're approving, and it'll kind of learn what kind of dimensional values that you're tagging, what kind of combinations of those with different GL accounts, things like that. It'll start learning that information. So therefore, whenever something comes through that may have accidentally been coded to the incorrect thing, it will actually identify that that's an outlier. So that way it helps make your review and your approval process a little bit smoother. When we talk about the new release here in just a little bit, there's some additional functionality then that's been added in to kind of assist this outlier detection portion. So we recommend that if you are using journal entry approvals, then you actually enable this outlier detection. So let me show you where you can go to do that. Because you don't necessarily have to reach out to us to enable that. If you go to company, then go to your subscriptions. This does apply across all of the entities in your environment, okay? So you go to this AI machine learning and you click configure. Then this is enabling the AI services, and then this is enabling the general ledger approval, okay? This applied detection, I'll be talking about that when we talk about the new release functionality. So this is some additional assistance that was released in February to kind of assist with this. So you'll have enabled journal entry approval. Therefore, it's going to start learning and monitoring your journal entries to be able to identify any of those outliers as you're kind of going through that approval process. Let's see if I can get this video. We're just going to watch kind of a quick little video so you can kind of see how the outlier works.
Angela, I don't think we have any sound on the video, or I'm not sure if it's playing.
It has not yet been scored. You
There we
also
go.
have an outlier detected, which is an exclamation point is returned to you. And then you can also have an entry that's been scored, but has no outliers. If you want to know more about why you want outlier flag, you can, of course, take a look at the actual transaction and review the why. Here we have a transaction that has been scored, and you can see right at the top, it tells us how many of the entry lines have had an outlier detected. In this case, both of the transaction lines happen to have an outlier. However, it may have only been that you could have had, one, or it could be several, and we want to make sure that you don't miss any, which is why we give you a count up at the top. And then if you'll focus down towards the entries area, you can actually see which lines have outliers. If you take your mouse and hover over the outlier, it will actually give you a notice, as you can see here. So I've hovered over line 2, and it tells me that these transactions are unusual and the why behind it. I can then, of course, use this information to make my own decision about whether I'm going to approve, correct, or decline the journal entry. If you want to take advantage of the general ledger outlier detection, you will need to subscribe to the AI machine learning service. This service is available to you in the subscription area, and while it is included with the core subscription, you will need to make sure that you can see it. If you have any questions or don't see it in your subscription area, please take a look at the full release notes for more information on how you can have this enabled for you. Once you see the AI machine learning service, you will need to mark that you want to turn it on, and it will then ask you to configure the service. You will need to enable the data service. That enables us to basically take your data and learn from it to determine a pattern of your transactions. You want to make sure that you enable it for general ledger approval, and it will first display a status of in progress while it is going out and learning from your data. Once it is ready, it will send you an email notification, and you will also see the status shift here on the subscription configuration page to ready. That indicates that you are now able to apply the detection, which basically makes it visible for your users. We give you the control to decide to apply the detection so that you can notify approvers of what this new insight means and make sure that it's not a surprise. You may also need to update any of your views if you have been using any saved views for approvals to make sure that the outlier is visible. This, of course, enables you to have your approvals have this additional data point and hopefully will reduce the amount of adjustments that you need because you can do that upfront review and use this additional insight to help make sure you catch anything that's an anomaly. Once the learning is done, of course, you are ready to turn it on once your users are aware of the new feature.
So hopefully, any of you that may currently be using the journal entry approval process, you'll be interested in adding this outlier detection to your environment. Like I said, there's no additional subscription cost to that. You don't necessarily have to reach out to LBMC to enable that. You can go into your subscription settings and actually check that box to get that enabled. All right, so this is kind of the outlier detection workflow once again. So your approvals are enabled and configured, and that's in the journal ledger configuration. We have on the outlier detection is configured, right? So as you submit a journal entry for approval, then the AI tool is going to then evaluate that and identify if there's any outliers that apply to that journal entry. It's going to flag those mismatches. So therefore, as the approver, you can go in and take a look at that to see what those outliers are to kind of help speed up your review process. Like I said, we'll talk more about the additional functionality that's been applied to that when we look at the R1 new feature session. All right, so that's the end of the hot topic session. So give me just a second here and we'll switch over. Are there any questions about anything that we discussed so far while I'm switching over to my other presentation?
No, Angela, I don't see any questions so far. So doing a great job. Thank you.
Just a second, let me get switched over here. All right, so now we're going to talk about the new features that were released for R1 of this year. Hopefully you guys have been able to take a look at some of those on the home page of your Intacct environment. Those were released February 18th. As most of you may already know that those releases come out quarterly. There's not any action that you have to take on your side for anything in your environment to automatically update. And then we're going to take a look at what the remaining release dates are as well. One thing that I'd like to point out that if you don't currently have access to the Intacct community, I recommend that you try to get access to that. That's a great area for you to be able to do some research. It also allows you to go out there and post ideas of things that you might want to see changed in the Intacct environment. Intacct does take a look at those comments and those questions to be able to make these changes. And you'll notice that as I go through some of these different areas that were updated in this last release, I'll point out some that actually came from ideas that were submitted to the community. So if you don't actually currently have access to the community, definitely let us know. We'll make sure that we assist you with getting access to the Intacct community. All right, so some of the things that were changed on February 18th are related to permissions. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about how the Learning Center, there were initially permissions on each user that you'd have to identify and actually grant them access to be able to get to the Learning Center. Those permissions have been removed now. So now in those preferences, you can just mark, to get to the Learning Center, connect to the Learning Center from there. But the actual permissions in your user permissions has been removed. So you don't have to actually apply permissions for them to be able to access the Learning Center. They've also added an AP on the vendors. They've added permissions to be able to unmask the bank details. So that is a user by user permission based, right? As to whether you want them to be able to see the bank details and AP on the vendors. In contracts, they've added permissions for the bulk action runs, list and view options there. Currently, the bulk action runs will work with applying and processing a large number of like revenue reconciliation schedules at month end is part of the bulk action runs now. They're going to continue to enhance that bulk action runs functionality on future releases, but right now it's applying to revenue recognition functionality. And then in general ledger, they've added some permissions to be able to reclassify approved and posted general ledger transactions. Okay. Before, the reclassify option was available in AP and AR, but now they've made it available in general ledger. So if a general ledger has been approved and posted, then now you have a reclassify option there as long as your permissions allow you to do so. As I mentioned earlier, whenever a new functionality is added to Intacct, it does not automatically update user permissions. You would have to go in, if it's user-based, you'll have to go in and actually update those individual user permissions. Or if you are using a role-based, then you may have to assign a new role or update an existing role to include these permissions. All right, so how many people would benefit from seeing automation that would gather information from AP bills and input it into the UI? This is a yes or no. I know this has been a frequently asked question, right? So I want to see how many people would be interested in that. Hope everybody's had enough time to be able to answer that question. Most of the time, I'm going to see, hear people say yes, that's what they're interested in doing. So, Intacct is working on some functionality to increase and have some AP automation going forward. If you looked at the release notes for this last quarter, you'll see that there was an option to become an early adopter of some of this AP automation. Hopefully, within the next two releases, it will be released to the general public, the general users, to be able to actually use this functionality going forward. Right now, the early adopters program is full, so they can't accept any additional early adopters, but I did want to kind of talk through this process with everyone so you kind of know what's coming up for the future releases. So this functionality is basically going to kind of streamline your bill creation process, right? So you can either upload your vendor bills, okay, through a template. You can upload the vendor bills, and then Intacct will take a look at those vendor bills and then pre-populate the fields on the AP bill within the Intacct UI. Okay, so it can pre-populate the vendor name, the entry date, the due date, based off of the terms, things like that. It can pre-populate that information. Once it gets the information in there, then it will take a look at the previous vendor bills for that same vendor. It'll take a look at those previous ones and then populate whatever GL accounts that you may have posted those to previously and go ahead and populate that information in with the dollar amounts. Now it will post these AP bills in a draft state. So you still have the opportunity to review everything. It just eliminates a lot of the data keying that you may have to do, data entry keying that you may have to do. So it'll eliminate that. So there'll be two options of how to get this information in there. You can import the AP bills, or you can also forward the AP bills to a email address that'll be provided by Sage Intacct, and then it'll then take the process from there. It'll start reviewing the AP bill, processing the data, putting it into the UI, and then putting it into a draft state. So therefore, you can take a look at that before it actually posts. A copy of the AP bill itself will also be attached to that draft AP bill. So therefore, you can review it. So I just want to kind of give you an idea of what's coming up. It is in early adopter phase right now. Like I said, that early adoption wait list is full, but I just wanted to make that point to you so that way you can know that this is coming up available. as they continue to kind of test some different things and get some feedback from these early adopters. Right. Some other functionality that is also available is this is an electronic payment service called Vendor Payments powered by CSI. This allows you to pay vendors directly from Intacct. Okay, so if you have some vendors that instead of having to call them and make payment over the phone, then you can actually use this Vendor Payments powered by CSI. Intacct works directly with the vendors to determine which of these payment methods that they will accept. Okay, so the payment method options are ACH debit, check delivery, and virtual credit card. Okay, virtual credit card is like a one-time use credit card number that they'll be able to use to be able to apply payment against your bill. Like I said, they do work directly with the vendors to determine which one of those methods will be acceptable. And this is available to all of the U.S. companies. So if you're interested in adding that, then definitely let us know and we'll help you get that set up in the system. It is available across the board to all of the Intacct environments right now. If you're currently using the Wells Fargo Payment Manager, then it will be retired on July 14th. So this is an option that would be replacing that service. If you're currently using Wells Fargo Payment Manager, it will be retired July 14th, and this will be an option where you can replace that service that you're currently using. All right, some other things that they did in the environment itself is a kind of redesigned AP bill, right? So on the AP bill, you'll notice that at the very top right, where it has bill, they've actually added in the bill number there. So instead of just saying bill, they actually put the bill number up there for it, so it's very easily seen instead of it being hidden kind of down in the details into that white space. You have the AP bill number at the top. They've also kind of rearranged and cleaned up some of the white space in the areas below. The bill state has been changed as well. Previously, the bill state would have only said displayed, it may only display that it was reversed or paid or partially paid. So now you have a state that will actually show that it's been posted. Okay, you have a draft and posted, and now you also see the reverse paid and partially paid there. They moved the document ID to the far right on the other side of the attachment field. This document ID then would reference if this is an AP bill that was converted from a purchasing transaction, then it would have that document ID link here. So they've just moved it over to the far right on the other side of the attachment. They've also moved the places bill on hold box to just below the attachment field. If you are currently using different transactional currencies in your environment, then the currency table area before it took up quite a bit of white space on the AP bill screen, on the detail screen. So they now made that to where that's a collapsible field. So therefore it kind of allows you to have more information viewed on the screen at a time by being able to collapse that field. So that would be if you're using different transactional currencies. The information is still there, but it allows you to just kind of collapse that and kind of hide that. They've also added an AP bill history tab. They've added some more information to that tab. Okay, previously you could see like the modified date and who modified it. So now on this tab, in addition to be able to see the bill number at the top of the page, you'll also be able to see who created the bill and the created date. Then any kind of modification, you also see the vendor ID and the document number once again in the detail. Like I said before, it would just show like the modified information. So therefore, you can kind of see all of that within that one history screen or history tab. All right, so we have another question. Do you have the need to enter any draft AP bills? Okay, hopefully everyone's had enough time to be able to answer and respond to that question. So if you do have the need to enter draft AP bills, you can now enter those. You can import those in, right? Or you can actually add those directly into the UI. So the draft bills now only require the location and the amount and any custom fields that appear in the line level to be able to save it. Okay. If you're importing draft bills, you only require a location. Okay. So if you need to import any draft AP bills in, maybe you're having somebody, list those AP bills, you only have to have the location on that import template. If you're manually entering it in, then you can do the location, the amount, and any custom fields that appear in order to just save it as a draft. Now, if you don't know the amount and you're manually entering in, you can't put just zeros in the amount field to be able to save it as a draft bill. Now, with that draft bill option available, where you can now save those within Intacct itself, there's actually some standard views that are available in AP. So if we take a look at accounts payable here and we look at our bill listing, we have some standard views over here to the left-hand side. They've also added a standard view here that's called draft bills. So you don't have to create a custom view in order to see those draft bills. That draft bills view, it would also come in handy if you're using the AP automation whenever it's released to the general users. Then that draft bill view will be very beneficial then, so that way you can review any of those that have been updated via the AI. Some other areas that were updated as well, as I kind of mentioned earlier with the permissions, were that there's some permissions that were added to where you can unmask the vendor bank details in the bank files. So if you update those permissions on your users, then they'll be able to actually see all of the vendor information as far as their banking information on there to make sure that they can, make any updates as needed, make sure it's correct banking information that's on there instead of it being, X'd out to where you couldn't see that information. There's also some functionality where you can print checks in the order that the bills were selected for payment. So a lot of times you may have a stack of checks or have a stack of bills in front of you that you're like, okay, I want to pay all of these. And you'll go through and you may select like the first two AP bills to be paid, and you may skip down and select 2 or 3 more and skip back up and select maybe 1 or 2 more. So now there's a setting in the configuration for AP that you can actually print the checks in the order that the bills were selected for payment. So where that kind of becomes beneficial to you is that once your checks are printed out, you can compare the check with the AP bill. They're going to be in the same order and kind of compare them side by side as you're getting ready to mail those checks out. So that's an AP configuration where you identify that you want to print the checks in the order the bills were received or were selected for payment. So that kind of improves some efficiency as well as you are reviewing those before you send them out. Okay. Right. So accounts receivable, some added functionality in accounts receivable. We've had a lot of customers ask this as well, is in accounts receivable now, instead of having to go into the receive payment screen and put in your customer ID and then select the AR invoices that you're wanting to apply payment against, there's now an import option where you can actually import multiple customer payments at one time. Okay. The import can have up to 5,000 lines per file with a maximum of 1,000 invoices. Okay. Now, a bulk reversal of those applied payments is not currently available. So kind of keep that in mind so that you don't accidentally post things incorrectly. Okay. The payment types that are supported are going to be your cash, printed check, or the record transfer, as you can see in the table to the right. You can also deposit these into a specific bank account or into undeposited funds account or into a user specified payment summary. Okay. So you still have those options, but online ACH and online credit card payment method types are not currently supported with this import functionality. Okay. The invoices, like I said, I'll show you the process of how you can actually import this. So instead of having to select individual customers to apply payments, you'll actually go in and you can download this import template. I recommend trying it on just one customer first before you try to do it, apply payments to a lot of customer invoices. Like I said, there is not a bulk action reversal of these in case you misapplied those. So if you go to accounts receivable and go receive payments new, then you'll have this import option here. when you click import, then you can actually get to the template that you will use by this download template. Okay, when you open up this template, then you'll see that the fields required, you do have to have the invoice number and the customer ID. Hopefully many times the checks that you receive will have that information on them. Okay, if not, then hopefully it'll be very easy for you to kind of gather that information. So you have customer ID. This is where you identify the bank account ID or the undeposited funds account ID, what the payment method is. So you can see here, printed check, credit card, EFT cash, the receipt dates, payment dates, the document number. So this would be your check number, right? And then you have all of the, what to apply, how much to apply, how much the overpayment amount is, things like that. Once you get this saved, then you also come back to this receive payment screen and you'll click on that import. You'll upload the file here and click import, okay? And then it will apply all of those payments to the individual AR invoices instead of having to go in and select an individual customer each time. So hopefully that's getting a lot of smiles on faces. I can see this being used by a lot of customers who are using lockboxes to receive payments in, to where you can actually get this applied kind of in a more bulk fashion. Just keep in mind that a bulk reversal is not available right now. You'd have to go in and actually reverse those out individually if you misapplied those payments. All right. Some other AR enhancements. Right now, whenever you're sending out invoices from accounts receivable, right, the default is to the user information who generates the email. So if you look at accounts receivable and you're sending out invoices or statements from there, it will default to whoever the user is that you're logged in as. So if I'm here, either print or email, I'm going to say invoices. You'll see here that this has defaulted to my username. A lot of people had requested that be changed, so you don't have to come in here and override that every time. So now in the accounts receivable configuration, there's actually an option to where you can toggle and actually change the AR configuration to say custom profile. On the custom profile, then you can say sender email address, sender name, and a sender phone number. So then that will be the actual default information that appears on that print or email screen. That will be the information that overrides the user information. This can be different on different entity levels. So this isn't just a global setting. You can actually make this change at each entity level individually. So therefore, you can have different email addresses. So if you have different entities that have different lines of business, different AR divisions, you can have this set as a different information at each entity level. All right. So in contracts module, there's been some new functionality that's been added as well. There's now the ability to forecast renewal information. Okay. Previously, there were some standard reports available that allowed you to forecast billing, forecast revenue recognition, right? So now there's ability to be able to forecast renewal information as well. So there's some standard reports that are available, and there's some fields that you can use as filtering on reports if you're building some custom reports as well. Just keep that in mind that there is that availability of that object information to be able to kind of see that. Okay. If you're currently using contracts and you'll need to edit filters that on reports that are based on contract lines, contract billing schedules, billing schedule entries, and revenue schedules and revenue schedule entries to exclude this object. Okay, so any of your custom reports that you have that information as the standard object, then you'll have to exclude the renewal forecast information. A few weeks ago, we actually sent out an email to all of our customers that we knew were using the contracts module to make them aware of that. But if you did not receive that email and you have some questions, definitely reach out to us and we'll be able to help you get those reports updated or kind of guide you in what manner you need to go about, kind of updating those reports. So that way you don't have any unexpected information showing up in them. All right, they've also added the bulk action runs. So the bulk action runs, as I mentioned earlier, primarily this is being used for posting multiple revenue schedules, okay, at one time, and expense schedules as well. So that way that kind of runs it offline And so therefore, they're not having to, if somebody has a large volume of revenue schedules that they need to get posted at month end, sometimes some customers have kind of filtered those down just a little bit because the maximum number of entries that could be posted previously were 2,000. So now with this bulk action runs, there's not a limit. So therefore, it kind of allows that all to process offline at one time. So for some of the larger companies to have a larger volume of revenue recognition postings and expense postings each month, it should speed up that process without them having to break it down and filter it down. Right. We also have some additional changes made to contracts to where if you generate an invoice from a contract, you can now actually change the transaction date and the GL posting date on that invoice in order entry. Okay. You cannot change those dates if the invoice has been paid. Right. Previously, if you needed to make changes to that, you'd have to delete the invoice, regenerate the invoice with correct information. So now you can actually edit that as long as the invoice has not been paid. Okay. And keep in mind that the GL posting date cannot be any earlier than the contract line GL posting date. Right. And then another thing that if the GL posting date on the invoice is changed, then the actual posting date on the billing schedule and the transaction date on the journal entries are also changed. Okay. So it kind of goes back and makes those updates as well. This was an idea that came from the Intacct community. So just want to point that out. The Intacct does take a look at those ideas that you guys are posting out there. So this was an idea that came from the Intacct community to make these changes, to be able to make these changes to these contract invoices. All right. So we talked earlier about the General Ledger GL Outlier Assistant, or the GL Outlier functionality. So now in this release, they've added some additional functionality to that. That's called the GL Outlier Assistant. By enabling the Outlier Assistant, then this actually notifies the submitter who's submitting the journal entry about any outliers before it actually gets to the approver. So therefore, the person submitting it can make those changes and those updates before it ever actually gets to the approver. So hopefully that just speeds up the process for the approver as well. Okay, so you can just enable that in the same area that we looked at earlier for the GL Outlier. Okay. It's just this assistant notifies the submitter of any outliers before it actually goes to the approver. Now you can turn off and you can disable this outlier assistant at any point in time. So if for some reason you rather those all come to the actual approver to review, then you can disable that feature at any point in time. Okay. All right. General Ledger reclassifying journal entries. This again is another idea that was submitted to the Intacct community. Okay, about being able to have the ability to reclassify journal entries that have been approved and posted. Okay, so the different areas of the journal entries you can actually reclassify are the account or dimension values, the memo, the description, the reference number, the attachment, and you can also add a comment. Okay, for the line amounts, as long as the total credits and the debits are the same as what they originally were, then it'll allow you to change that as well. Okay, so it won't let you add more lines and delete lines that would change the total dollar amount of the journal entry. As long as the total credits and debits are the same, then you'll be able to make those changes as well. Okay, so hopefully that will assist a lot of you guys instead of having to create another journal entry to correct an original journal entry, by being able to do this reclassifying reclassification of your journal entries. All right. So General Ledger dynamic allocations. I'm not sure how many people may be using the dynamic allocations functionality within Intacct, but it is available. It does have an additional subscription cost. But dynamic allocations is a little bit different than your transactional allocations that are part of your standard product. The dynamic allocations will take a look at the ending balance of a GL account and then reallocate it to other GL accounts or across departments or other dimensional values, right? So you kind of define what you want it to do in this dynamic allocation transaction, right? Identify what you're wanting to do, but this kind of automates that process at month end for you. So you'll kind of go through, you'll identify, okay, if you're needing to reallocate, say, your overhead, right, across multiple different departments, then you can tell it to look at whatever GL accounts that have your overhead activity posted to them. It'll take the ending balance of those GL accounts and then reallocate it into, by department or by location, whatever dimensions you want to have it allocated, and whatever percentage of that, however you want to allocate it that way. So what Intacct has added to that in this release is they've now added the option to be able to allocate statistical account entries as well. Okay, before it was just financial information that you're reallocating. So now you can actually reallocate statistical amounts as well. So it's kind of enhancing this functionality, this feature. So if you're not currently using dynamic allocations and you're interested in maybe adding that, you can definitely reach out to us, and we'll be glad to work with you and kind of see if that can serve a purpose for you. A lot of people like to use dynamic allocations because they're not having to do these reallocations in Excel at the end of the month. They just have it automatically done with an Intacct. So definitely, if you're not using that, then reach out to us, and we'll be glad to talk through it with you and see if it will be something that will benefit you. All right. So there's also been some changes made to the project dimension, right? It's also known as the grant for the not-for-profit companies. So there's been new fields that are added to the project or grant dimension that are specifically for additional grant details and like restrictions, okay? These fields can be used in generating reports, right? A lot of times previously, these had to be added via custom fields to be tracked. So now they're just standard fields on a grant if you're using grants to track information. You see some of those fields are revenue restriction expiration years, first restriction expiration date. You also see that schedule of expenditures of federal awards. You see all of those fields that are available there. So a lot of that was just managed previously by custom fields on the project or grant dimension. Now those are standard fields to allow additional assistance with generating reports as needed. All right. So I have another question here is, how many custom reports have you built in your Intacct environment using any of the report writer tools? I know several people have probably built quite a few. Others may have asked us for some assistance with writing reports, and some may just be using a standard report tool, financial reports and custom reports that are available. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to be able to answer that question. So this release, they've also made some reporting enhancements as well. So some of those reporting enhancements in the custom report writer, there's some new data sources that are available for the supply chain management. Okay, so if you're using the inventory module within Intacct, then now there's some new data sources that are for the warehouse transfer items and inventory control detail. Okay, that can be chosen on custom reports, and that custom reports are the ones that are available in platform services application. In Interactive Custom Report Writer, they've also added filtering options that allow you to group by date, location, and department. Okay, so if you guys are not currently using Interactive Custom Report Writer, definitely reach out to us for a subscription cost for that. Interactive Custom Report Writer is just allows you to have like more flexibility in building those custom reports. It gives you a lot more functionality that's more similar to what you can see in Excel. As far as formatting, it allows you to do different functions in the ICRW report, like if-then statements, things like that, to be able to kind of have it a more customized report instead of having to export reports out of Intacct and make the modifications in Excel before you can actually present them to other people. So Interactive Custom Report Writer, there's two different licenses for that. The licenses apply to the entire environment. If you purchase the run-only license for Interactive Custom Report Writer, you do get access to a large number, up to like 80 additional standard reports, depending on what modules you may be subscribed to, that are just kind of standard reports that Intacct provides to you, and they keep adding to that library every single month, adding more reports to that library. And like I said, it applies to multiple different applications. So if you're interested in adding that, definitely reach out to us, and we'll be glad to kind of walk through a demo with you and kind of show you, what additional reports you may gain as well by using that. So just on the filtering they've added is just by grouping by date, location, and department. Now in the financial reports, they've also added a new tab. It's called Notations tab. So this will allow you to kind of add a column anywhere and kind of gives you an area to be able to make some comments, to text that will explain, why there's differences in dollars or something like that. So on that notations tab, take a look at some screenshots here, and then we'll take a look at it Intacct. So you'll create the notation content. So you notice there's a tab to the left there for the notations comment. Once you do that, then you'll identify what column that you want it placed in. And then when you print a report, you'll actually see that information will actually print on the report. Okay, so we'll take a look at that in Intacct. You can kind of see what that looks like. So if I go to my financial reports, and I'm just going to choose one of these existing reports. If I choose one of these existing reports and I click edit, you'll notice on the left-hand side now I have a notations tab. So if any of you have ever used the computations tab before, where you can actually add computations in, and then you choose which column you want that computation to be presented in, the notations works in a similar format. Okay, you'll choose add notations. When you add that column, you can come in here and you can make comments in here of whatever you want to say. You don't have to have a comment on every row, okay? But you can make comments in that notations column. You can have multiple notation columns. You can have like notation 1, notation 2, okay? Where you can add different comments in different rows, maybe serving different purposes, right? And of where you're wanting it placed in the report. So once you get those notation columns added, then you'll go back to your columns tab. And in your columns tab, you can come in here and say, if I wanted to add my notations column to the right of column 2, I want to add a column. And then in that column, you'll choose that notations down here at the bottom. Okay. When I choose that notations, then any row that's in column 2, my note down would show up that I put into my notations column previously. You may have also noticed when I was scrolling through this, some functionality that came out last release was that you can actually add in a blank column in your reports. So this is a vertical divider, it's a spacer. You can have some actual vertical blank columns in your report as well. Okay, so it's kind of 2 new things that came out recently that can enhance your financial reports. So the notation, you identify which notations. You notice I had 2 that I had created over here on my tab. So I'll have the option of whichever one I want to present in that column. But then you would just save that. And when you preview that, I can preview this. I had an error there. When you save it and when I preview it, then when I print that report, then it will actually display the information in my report. So like I showed in the screenshot. Now, if you have hide totals marked in the presentation, when you set up the format presentation of your report, if you have to hide the totals enabled, then the notations will not display in the report output. So just kind of keep that in mind that if you're going through this process and you have hide totals enabled, then you will not see the notation comments when you get ready to print this out. Okay. All right. There's some other advanced CRM integration updates as well. So now the advanced CRM for Salesforce integration is support the order entry renewals and revenue recognition templates. It will support that now. It'll also allow you to break the links between Intacct and Salesforce. I know in years past, there's been times that customers have had to have the link broken between a Salesforce account and an Intacct customer account. There may have been multiple Salesforce accounts created and they're trying to merge those together. Therefore, it's just one customer in Intacct. We had to go to Intacct support to get those broken previously. So now you can actually break that link yourself as an admin user. You can break the link between the Intacct customer and the Salesforce account. You can break it between the contact and the Salesforce contact, also between the Intacct item and the Salesforce products. So we no longer have to submit a ticket to Intacct support in order for the admin user to be able to break those links. All right. So earlier I mentioned about some early adopter programs, right? I mentioned the AP automation early adopter program was closed now. They had outstanding response to that, so it's kind of closed right now. But there are some other opportunities for you to become an early adopter to kind of see what some new functionality that will be coming out and be released. One of those is for order entry and purchasing. Okay, that if you enter transactions at the top level and you use order entry and purchasing, there's an early adopter program that allows you then to test populating your subtotal dimensions. And this is for top level transactions only. If you want to participate in that, let us know. We can submit the information to Intacct to get you into that early adopter program. There's also another early adopter program for cash management called Creation Rules. What the purpose of Creation Rules are for is to allow you to allows Intacct to automatically generate a journal entry, okay, to match like incoming bank transactions that are like bank fees or daily deposits. If it's like recurring bank fees, you can set up a creation rule in cash management that when Intacct sees that, then it will actually automatically create the journal entry for you to record that activity, okay? But you define that creation rule. Then there's also another early adopter program, platform services. It will be for platform triggers. So platform triggers automate tasks to make automatic calls to the application in response to data changes, okay? So if you're doing any kind of API calls, this might be something that you might want to become an early adopter of that program and be able to kind of test that functionality out. If you're interested in any of these, make sure to reach out to LBMC so that way we can assist with getting you registered to be an early adopter for those. There's some additional training opportunities available for customers now. So I mentioned earlier about the Intacct Learning Center, how you guys can actually access that. If you don't have access, let us know and we can help you get access to the Learning Center. There's also customer office hours that are now available. You can see the link on the screen that allow you to register for these customer office hours. They have upcoming events in March, April, May, June for different topics. And then they'll expand that list on out for each month. They'll have a 1 hour customer office hour each month. They are interactive, so therefore you can ask questions while you're in that session. And it's all just to be able to increase your knowledge and share best practices, right, with you and any other Intacct users. So if you haven't registered for these customer office hours, I recommend that you do that, so that way you can have that additional information. If you register for these office hours and then you are unable to attend, then you do receive a recording link after the session. So therefore you can go back and take a look at it afterwards. Right. The next release is going to be on May 13th. As I mentioned earlier, there's not any action you have to take on your part. It will automatically be pushed out to your environment. Typically, the release notes are available in your environment a couple of weeks before the release actually comes out. LBMC will once again be offering a hot topic presentation in the new release review as well for each of these quarters. The next one will be release May. So, start looking at your email beginning of May, middle of May from our marketing team as to when our next hot topic and new release session will be scheduled so that you can get scheduled. Also, if you have any ideas for hot topics that you'd like to see addressed in the upcoming quarters, definitely let me know. You can email me directly or you can email our marketing team and they can pass the information along to me if there's any hot topics that you would like for us to address in the upcoming sessions. Right. I want to thank you for your time. Sarah, I'm not sure if there's any additional questions for the presentation.
No, I don't see any specific questions, but certainly if anything does come up after this webinar, please be sure to reach out to us, and we will send out the recording for this presentation in just a few days' time. The email will also include a survey. So like Angela said, we'd love to get your feedback on any other topics you'd like to know more about. Thank you, Angela, and thank you everyone for attending today, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you.